My family moved here from Detroit in 1971. My dad was a professor at Mesa Community College for many, many years. So I spent a lot of time on that campus when I was growing up.
What was your impression of Arizona when you got here?
Well, we had never seen tamales, so the first time our neighbors brought us tamales, we tried to eat them with the husks on. I spent my entire youth in Tempe, right about rural and the freeway. And in '71, there was nothing south of the freeway, and rural was only 2 lanes. And that was the southern end of the valley, is where the 60 is now. And over the course of my 1st through 3rd grade years, they started building the 60, and we used to play in the construction. The first album I ever bought was A Night at the Opera by Queen, and Freddie Mercury was my first rock and roll hero. And I spent most of my youth trying to sing like him. And then Kiss was the next big thing to hit me. And the first concert I ever saw was Cheap Trick open for Kiss at Veterans Memorial Coliseum in 1977. And that was the very first day of junior high. I began the 7th grade at McCamey Junior High School, and that night we went to see Kiss.
When did you actually start playing music, playing an instrument?
Well, I started writing songs when I was in the 3rd grade. I started playing drums when I was in the 6th grade, but I had already been writing songs with melodies and lyrics and stuff. And it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that I finally picked up the guitar and started trying to put all these songs that I had written to real music. You know, I was singing them into a tape recorder, but I didn't have any background music. But
I read about the origin of the name Gin Blossoms, which is pretty amusing. I'm a W.C. Fields fan.
all right.
But how did that happen? Why did they choose that?
Well, I believe it was Bill, our bass player, who came up with that, and he was reading the book, I believe it's called Hollywood Babylon, and the photograph of W.C. Fields in there, and the caption beneath it said W.C. Fields with Gin Blossoms. And I believe Bill pointed it out to Doug Hopkins right then. This would be a great name for a band. And I remember I was in a band, or I was trying to start my first band with my friends. We worked at Zia Records together, and we were trying to put together our first band. We were racking our brains for a decent name. And I remember saying to them, God, I wish we had come up with Gin Blossoms. That's such a good name. And about a week later, I got called to audition for Gin Blossoms. So I had to leave my friends in my wake and, you know, go do it. But, you know, at first I was really afraid to do it because they were a pro operation for, you know, that scene. And I had never been in a band before. I was just doing open mic nights and stuff. But I was with a friend of mine. We were going to see Timothy Leary at After the Gold Rush. And I told him, oh, the Gin Blossoms asked me to audition, but I turned him down. And my friend said, you're an idiot. They're a working band. They're a real band. If you're in that group, you will immediately be doing shows. And so I challenged myself, you know, to audition. And, you know, it was obviously the right thing to do. There were only so many of us in the scene in those days that were eligible. And I just happened to have the exact right tool set for what they needed. So.
How did they discover you?
Well, we all worked at Tower Records together. Bill Lean and Scott Johnson and I all worked at Tower Records. And we had, Bill and Doug and I had all gone to the same high school, McClintock High School. So we had a lot of friends in common. And one night, you know, we were out, you know, partying, and Doug was there, and Doug heard me singing, and he suggested to Bill that I try out. So I tend to like a lot of hard rock, and in my heart of hearts, I'm in a band that has explosions and costumes and stuff like that. But you know, you grow up in Tempe, there's only so much that can happen, and you know, I'm really lucky that I wound up here. It's truly a miracle of circumstance for me to have found the exact right place where I should spend my life, you know. Well, this was the 80s, so we were very much into the Minneapolis music scene, bands like The Replacements. They were a huge influence on us, and I remember that Doug and Bill and I we were really big fans of an Australian band called The Church. And I used to feel like the Gin Blossoms were kind of taking the Church and bringing it into an American power pop setting. I always felt it was, I used to say that if the Church and Cheap Trick, if their tour buses crashed, it would sound like the Gin Blossoms. Well, we were all over Tempe, 4 nights a week, long wonks on Mill Avenue, where we would play as the Del Montes. The guy that I replaced in the band, he was on probation, so they got this gig last minute. They couldn't inform his parole officer. They had to come up with another name. They decided on the Del Montes. And when I joined the band, we continued that tradition. So we always played at long wongs as the Del Montes, never as the Gin Blossoms. And then also we were playing at the Sun Club, and that was back when Hans first owned the place. And a lot of nights at the Sun Club, the Mason Jar. I'll never forget, a friend of mine was introducing me to some girls. He was trying to impress them. And my friend says, Robin's in the Gin Blossoms. They play the Mason Jar on Friday nights. You know, like that was the pinnacle of what you could accomplish in this scene. So, well, the New Times named us the best of Phoenix in '88 and '89, and in 1988, when they gave us that award, they signed us up for South by Southwest. So we went to South by Southwest in 1989, representing the Phoenix New Times, and there we were great. So we started getting a lot of attention from A&R types, and by the time we went back to South by Southwest in 1990. We were one of the buzz bands around the country. We had, developed a reputation. We had been to New York and performed in a couple of big shows. And our 1990 show at South by Southwest was kind of a big deal. And what I feel is one of our greatest accomplishments ever was in 1990, the Austin Chronicle named us one of the top 10 acts of South by Southwest. And I remember thinking, how awesome is that? What an amazing thing. We're just this little band from Tempe, and Austin just seemed like Emerald City, this magical place, and South by Southwest was such a big deal. So, to be talked about on that level was, really gratifying. We went to New York City, part of the New Music Marathon, and we performed at the Marquee with the Jayhawks and Soul Asylum. And that, I remember feeling we are in the scene now, because these were both groups that I had their records, just a couple years before working at Zia, playing both of those bands. And suddenly, we're there and we're a part of it, and, we're, on their level. And that was pretty cool.
So I read that you guys did a gig in Iraq supporting the troops. Were you in the band at the time?
Yeah, this was just a few years ago. 2010, we went to Iraq. We did 7 shows across Iraq, all for the troops. And I got to open the show one night, and I remember thinking I'll never get to say this again, but I said, "Happy Thanksgiving, Baghdad." So, that won't ever happen again.
How did that come about?
Oh, the USO looks for bands, and I guess somebody at the USO must have been a Gin Blossoms fan.
That's cool. So what do you consider your most interesting or exciting moments in your career at this point? Well,
certainly recording New Miserable Experience was probably the most important thing we've ever done. And getting out of Tempe, getting a recording contract was a big, big deal, and we were really proud of ourselves. And of course, we were terrified and, motivated. And going to Ardent Studios in Memphis was a big deal because so many great records in my collection had been recorded there. And, we were fans of The Replacements. The Replacements released a record called Pleased to Meet Me. And there was a song on it called Alex Chilton. He's the singer of Big Star. So we all became fans of Big Star, the group that Ardent Studios was built for. And then 2 years later, there we are at Ardent, recording in the same room as Big Star and the Replacements, using the same amplifiers that both of those bands had access to. And you know, just the continuation of the story, how it bounces around. It goes to Big Star, to the Replacements, to us, and we're all there in that same room making classic records. You know, that to me is one of the most significant parts of our story, is that happened.
So if you could summarize why you're successful and why you continue, you keep going on and reinventing yourselves, if you want to call it that, or whatever you want to call it. What is it about what you guys are doing in chemistry, whatever it is, that sustains what you do?
We have good songs. I think that's the main reason that we were successful in the first place and why we continue to be successful. It's all about having memorable tunes. You know, being able to write something that connects with people, that they can remember, and something that's timeless. And it all comes down to the songs. There's nothing without that. And on top of that, we have a great deal of musical chemistry. And together we play like we wouldn't with anybody else. And it's strange because, you know, you can't plan for this. It's not always ideal, but I know that we work as a unit, and that as a unit we have touched people and connected with millions of people, and that it has something to do with the way we play together, the combination of mine and Jesse's voices and the combination of the guitars, and all of that is built on a foundation of decent songs.
And you've had some personnel changes through the years.
Mostly drummers. We've lost a few drummers over the years, but we're very lucky now. We've got Scott Hessel in the band, and it's almost like having an original member, someone who's been a part of our scene since the beginning, and someone who we had a lot in common with and a lot of common friends and stuff. So, you know, we've really got the right guy. So.
How do you feel about the music business today?
Well, it's a big freaking mess as far as, you know, it's just not what it was. We were lucky. We were part of the last generation of groups to get signed to old-fashioned recording contracts, and to be a part of the system that allowed you to develop as an artist and to record on analog tape and all of that. It was the very sort of end of all of that. And we were lucky. We were with the right label, and they gave us the opportunity to screw up really bad, which we did. And then they still gave us another chance, you know. When we signed our deal, we went to California and we blew $100,000 failing to record our first album. And so we recorded more than half of a record, spent $100,000, and we had to throw the whole thing away. And we came home to Tempe with our tail between our legs, thinking we were going to be dropped, feeling really dejected. And we were lucky that they gave us the opportunity to self-produce an EP. And then they put us out on the road with virtually no support, or there was no radio or anything like that. And we were the only band on tour in December in Idaho. And it was a brutal month, but my feeling looking back is that they were trying to shake loose all of the rotten fruit to see if we could survive that process. And until a band has spent months on the road, without fame and without record company support, and until you've done that, you really can't know whether or not they're going to be able to do it. And so it was a very smart idea of A&M's to let us do that EP up in Crumling, and then to put us out on tour in the middle of winter. And it was just about 2 months after that, in February of '92, when we went to Memphis to record New Miserable Experience. Well, the best advice I can give is to write good songs, you know, because again, it really does come down to that. You know, try and keep your band together. That's the other big trick, you know. And I mean, we're not exactly what we were when we began, but, you know, we've been able to keep the core of the band intact for 28 years now, and that in itself is a miracle of chaos mathematics. And if you can, you gotta keep the band together, you know. And obviously, we lost Doug Hopkins while recording New Miserable Experience. And it was a terrifying time for us, and we had to decide whether or not we were going to try and keep the band together. And normally losing a member as significant as Doug would kill it dead. But we, you know, we fought on. And again, it was absolutely terrifying. You know, to fire Doug and to lose him in that way, and to have a recording contract, to have a record in the can that we didn't know if anyone was ever going to hear it. It was a really, really terrifying time for us. And you know, there's things I wish I could go back and do differently, but I don't know that, at least in Doug's case, that anything ever would have changed, you know. We, you know, he was just trying to fail, you know. There's no other way to say it. He was terrified. He could have, you know, we were looking to Doug to step up and be the leader of the band. And he was, for all intents and purposes, the leader of the group. But when we got to Memphis, he just crawled into this shell, and he was barely able to perform, and we just, you know, we struggled to, you know, to make that album. And it was a bloody and really, really difficult experience. And while at the same time we knew we were doing something special, we knew that it was a good record. But when it was done and in the can and we had to fire Doug, you know, we didn't know if anyone would ever hear it. And you know, that was a pretty terrifying, like, 8 months of our life.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I miss Doug so terribly, but you know, as much as I miss him, I'm angry. I'm pissed at him that he's not still here. You know, he's not here to still play with us. He's not here to know our kids. And I'm more angry with him than anything else. And I just, you know, just wish there was some way that it could have gone down differently. But, you know, he controlled his own fate. So.
Well, you're still in Arizona, and I'm wondering what keeps you here.
Well, actually, I live on Long Island in New York now. Yeah, which is about as different from Tempe as Iceland or Germany. It's really a different place. And I've been in New York now for about 15 years, and I miss it. I miss Arizona terribly. I come back like once a month. I spend a lot of time out at Saguaro Lake, and I've got friends and family here, so I get back quite a bit. But I miss living here. I really miss Mexican food. There's no Mexican food in New York. You know, and I make the best carnitas on Long Island. So when we travel for our shows, there's 8 of us, including the crew, and we're coming from 5 different airports to all meet up at, you know, the Barnstable County Fair or wherever it is. So,
and why did you choose to come here to rehearse?
We chose this place because we have a, you know, a deep history with Curtis Grippy. And his band, Dead Hot Workshop, and ours, we came up together. And we were part of the same scene in Tempe, and eventually they signed on with our manager. They bought our van, the van that's on the cover of New Miserable Experience. Eventually Dead Hot bought it. And I got a great story about that van. Doug had been fired from the group, and then New Miserable Experience came out in October of '92. The label loaned us the money to buy the van. We packed it up and we were driving from Phoenix all the way to Philadelphia to begin our tour with Toad the Wet Sprocket and launch the record. So we left Phoenix, got all the way to Memphis, where we spent a couple nights just hanging out with our friends at Arden Studios. And then as we were leaving Memphis for Philadelphia, we got on the freeway and the van just died. It just died right there on the freeway. So we had to have it towed, and the next day we found out that there was sugar in the gas tank. Apparently, before we left Tempe, Doug Hopkins had snuck over to the van and put sugar in the gas tank. And we made it all the way to Memphis with all that sugar in the gas tank before it finally died. And so when we owned that van, we called it Jack Ruby. But when Dead Hot Workshop bought the van from us, they renamed it Sugar. Well, you know, the Meat Puppets were on a different level from us in those days, but they were big heroes for me. I absolutely love the Meat Puppets, and they lived, a couple of them lived right around the corner from Zia Records where I was working, so I would always get so excited when they would, you know, come into the store, and I was a big fan. So the Meat Puppets were a huge inspiration, and to me, they are the soundtrack of the Sonora Desert. When I think about Arizona, when I think about the scenery in the Sonora, I immediately hear the Meat Puppets, Up on the Sun and Look at the Rain. You know, those songs sound like Arizona to me.
Cool. We interviewed Chris recently, and
Yeah.
he was really fun.
I'll bet. I'll bet. Oh, one of my favorite memories of just bouncing around the scene was I was at the Mason Jar to see Jonathan Richman, and I bumped into Chris, and Jonathan Richman was taking a break, and Chris goes, "Robin, let's go talk to him." And so there was a moment where Chris and I cornered Jonathan Richman in the corner of the Mason Jar, and we just fanned out on him. You know, we just geeked out on him.
That's cool.
You go to Nashville, and every single bar has at least an acoustic musician, and there's music blasting out of they put the speakers out on the street so people hear music when they walk by. I think Mill Avenue should be like that. You know, it has the potential to support lots of nightclubs and lots of music. And, you know, for a while it kind of did. You know, there was a period of at least several years where Mill Avenue was filled with music. And, you know, I know there's still a scene, but at that time it was cool that we sort of had a centralized kind of location. And it's something as scenic and you know, as cool as downtown Tempe was. You know, it was the perfect bohemian college town rock and roll environment. You know, it was ideal, and we were lucky that we had it there to support what we were doing. Well, I think it has some, you know, again, Mill Avenue was unique in that it had, you know, it was a place where all the bands kind of came together and then we all had in common. And as far as I can tell, yeah, that isn't there anymore. There's always lots of music, but without like a downtown scene or a set of clubs that are regular stops for the local bands, it doesn't seem to be quite the same. But I don't want to be one of those people that says, oh, my high school sucks ever since we graduated, you know. I know that there's great stuff happening, but, you know, there was a time where our scene was really exciting, and it was beginning to compete with places like Seattle and Austin. At one point, there were 5 or 6 bands in Tempe on Mill Avenue that all had major label recording contracts. And that was the only time in history where in Arizona history, where we've had that sort of activity.
I hope it returns.
I hope so too, but, you know, I'll be at a casino in Iowa by the time it does. So, oh yeah, celebrity theater. Well, the first show I ever saw at Celebrity was Jimmy Buffett in 1977. My mom bought tickets to take me for my birthday, and I'll never forget it. You know, he's doing Cheeseburger in Paradise, and like 4 topless girls came running out on the stage, and we're jumping around Jimmy Buffett, and my 13-year-old brain just exploded. That was pretty cool. But by far my greatest memory at the Celebrity, outside of us opening for the Psychedelic Furs, I saw Miles Davis there in 1987. And we had gotten free tickets because we worked at Tower Records, me and my friend. And we got down there, and somehow, I don't remember exactly what happened, but we managed to trade up, and we ended up in the second row for the Miles Davis concert. And just blew my mind. I didn't know a lot about his music, but I knew I was in the presence of a master. And watching that man stalk the stage like a jungle cat, just he'd play a little bit, and he'd look around, and just go. He'd point at somebody, and they'd have to do something, and that was amazing, absolutely amazing. And then, just recently we got to share the stage with Alice Cooper, very cool. And a few years back I saw The Darkness there. I took my son to see The Darkness, one of our favorite bands. So
we greatly appreciate you taking the time to do that.
It's my pleasure. I'm super proud. Hans Olsen called me in my car, and he said, "Robin, we voted to induct you guys." And I just started laughing, and I said, "Hans, if I could go back in time and tell my 20-year-old self that you were going to call me and say that, that kid would have lost his freaking mind, So I'm very, very proud, and I love my bandmates. I love our band. We're very lucky that we have what we do.